For years, I was obsessed with the first 48. I never missed an episode. And then one day, I stopped. Just like that. Let me tell you why. I really loved all things true crime and other fictional police procedural shows like Law and Order and things like that. But like true crime, Snapped, Dateline, uh, 48 Hours, you name it, I was in. I just love those shows. They were entertaining, uh, you know, they had all kinds of stuff going on all the time. But my favorite was the first 48. You really had a chokehold on me, truly. And it was my comfort show. When I was running around working 2, 3 jobs when I first arrived, anytime I was home, the first 48 would be on and I would be watching. Even if it was just like background sound, just listening to the action happening at the same time, I was there. That was my show. Out of all the detectives in the show, my 3 favorites, they happened to be Black. They were Sergeant Caroline Mason from the Memphis Police Department, Detective Dwayne Thompson from the Dallas Police Department, and Detective Chris Anderson from the Birmingham Police Department. They all felt like family to me. You know, big sister, cousin, uncle, big brother. I don't know. I felt like I knew them more than a lot of the others. And I could tell that this was also what a lot of the people they interacted with in the community felt about them as well. Caroline Mason, for example, she would show up to the crime scene in high heels, her long nails always perfectly manicured, her hair was always laid, and a beautiful outfit on. And you know she wasn't running after anybody in those high heels, but she looked fabulous. And that was the part that you really loved about her. I think there was there was an episode where she was using her curling iron at her desk while getting ready to go to another scene. Just Caroline Mason. Dwayne Thompson was like pretty big and imposing type of figure with like a deep voice, and I love the way she would say Dallas police. I've never heard anybody pronounce the word police that way, and that made him very endearing. And he had that big presence, like you would just respect him as soon as you saw him. He would call everybody son, and especially the young Black boys and Black men that he would encounter, and they would feel, comfortable with him. Detective Anderson was less boisterous than Detective Thompson, but he also very charismatic, and he felt familiar and safe. You wanted to talk to him. And I think that's what made people really trust them and oftentimes confess or say things that they would not otherwise say, regardless of, whether they did something wrong or not. That was good for TV when you watched it, and that made them very lovable characters. But the more I learned about policing and the justice system in America, and the more I felt a bit disturbed about the tactics that they used, I started questioning everything. The rights to remain silent just seemed to go out of the window. Suspects and witnesses would just come in, and they either didn't think that they did anything wrong, so they didn't need a lawyer or anything like that, or they didn't think that they needed to remain silent, or they felt so comfortable because of the way they were treated by detectives like the 3 that I mentioned before. But almost every one of the detectives that were portrayed on the show had their own ways of making, people feel like they could talk to them, that they had their best interests at heart, and they just started talking, just talking. Each episode of the first 48 usually includes 1, 2, or 3 different cases, sometimes within the same department, sometimes in a different, each case is in a different city, but every case ends with what happens to the suspect. Then they will say the suspect is still at large if they are not able to get anybody, but otherwise it will be whoever they arrested and is charged and awaiting trial, or that person pled guilty and was sentenced to, or that person was found guilty and was sentenced to whatever. And you think, oh, good, case closed, well, job well done, and you move on to the next. But the reality is much more complex than that. When you know that a lot of the times the people that were charged at the end awaiting trial, most of the time they did not go to trial because in the US, 95% of state cases do not go to trial. They end in a plea deal, guilty plea deal, right? And 98% of the federal cases end the same way because it's faster, it's more economically sound, it saves a lot of money, and that's resolution. The people who've been victimized have a resolution, the state has resolution. That's what you see. Very often, also, cases are just, the charges are just dropped. But you wouldn't know that if you don't keep up with the case, if you don't have any personal interest with that particular case, you're not going to find out. And there's only like the first 48 has a follow up kind of show that's called the first after the first 48. And sometimes they follow up after cases that go to trial. But a lot of those cases didn't even air on the show. They're not even related to the show. They're just showing trials. But the actual cases that are shown on the case, you don't on the show, you don't even know most of the time what really happened and why. Some of you, maybe many of you, might think that cases ending in a guilty plea is the best way to go. You get the answer that you wanted, somebody's paying the price, and we get to move on to the next one. The truth is, those statistics, the 95% and 98% that I told you, are very concerning because it speaks to a bigger problem within the system. We're rushing to get resolution rather than making sure that we get the right resolution. And if you start learning about the justice system, you'll find out that a lot of those defendants who are oftentimes very poor don't have the means to hire a private lawyer, so they get a public defender. Oops, I meant public defender. Who doesn't have the means or the time to properly defend them. So they're going to say, well, it's probably better if you take a plea. And you'll get less time because if you go to trial, then they will actually punish you even more for going to trial. That's called trial penalty. And that adds time to the sentence that you would get if you've taken the plea. That's how petty they can be. But beyond that, the fact that you will not go to trial means that you cannot actually defend yourself. Whether you're guilty or innocent, we should all have the right to defend ourselves adequately. Meaning that if you have witnesses that you want to call, you should be able to call them. If the prosecution have witnesses against you, you should have the right to cross-examine those people and find inconsistency in their stories, probably. And also because if the case that the state or the government, the federal government has against you is strong enough, it will withstand the scrutiny of the trial. And if not, maybe it's not a good case. And if there were mistakes and or misbehaviors in your case, a trial is the only place where you can expose those things. A guilty plea closes the door to all of that. No appeal, no way for you to bring in information that could exonerate you at some point. The American Bar Association Plea Bargain Task Force released a report on that topic in 2023. I will link it in the description box. In it, they explain how the practice of plea bargain prioritizes efficiency over innocence and fairness. Think about it. Guilty pleas bring resolutions to cases. That's great for statistics, but not good for any of us if it's the wrong one. Every case that doesn't go to trial means money saved and time saved. That's good, but not if it's at the expense of people's lives. Participants on the show reportedly sign a waiver giving permission to have their image, their faces shown during the airing of the episode. But we don't know how that consent is obtained. How informed is that consent? There have been complaints from people who appeared on the show that they never gave consent for their faces to be shown, people who were just witnesses or people who were actual suspects on it. And how can we know for sure? And even those whose faces are blurred and voices are distorted don't really get the privacy that they ask for. Because if you really look at it, people who really, really, really know them can still recognize them because the distortion is not that great. The blurring is not that great. Also, you can see the outfit. You can see the mannerisms of that person, the posture. And if you really know someone, you can recognize them through that. If I blur my face right now, and if I distort my voice, people who really know me would recognize me. And put that in the context of a murder investigation, either because I'm a suspect or let's say I'm a witness and I'm in the police department, I'm in the interrogation room, and they show me on TV snitching on someone. And if somebody sees that and think that they recognize who that person is, that person who's blurred, what might happen to that person? Who's responsible for that? And who's represented on the first 48? Poor white people, sometimes, but most of the time, overwhelmingly, it's black and brown people. Not only are they overwhelmingly represented as victims and also as suspects, but they always appear to commit stupid or dumb crimes, even though it's usually much more complicated than what it appears to be. And I'm not excusing anything, I'm just giving context. The crimes that they usually show are crimes of survival and necessity. And they're committed by a very small portion of the community in that neighborhood that they're showing or the city that they're showing. But the way it appears is like everybody is just out there just killing each other. They commit dumb crimes and they can be bought very easily with cheap fast food. Just put one of those meals in front of them and they're going to start singing like a canary. That's how stupid they are. In contrast, if you watch 48 Hours on CBS, you'll be in a completely different world. A world where people are mostly white, middle to upper class, much better off financially, and they have full lives. And the crimes that are committed are planned, organized, they're sophisticated, and sometimes even described as sexy, whatever that means. And people involved, whether the suspects or the victims, have full lives. And they're going to tell you all about those lives, which is good because this is how it should be. People have full lives, people are full human beings. But when you watch the first 48, that's not what happens. Even the victims' lives is diminished to, meh, they kind of deserved it. They were doing something they were not supposed to do anyway, so meh. The suspects, they have no life at all. They're just animals running around just killing one another for no reason. That's when the idea of black on black crimes get to take its wings and just fly everywhere. The black on black crime is not a thing. It's not a thing if white on white crime is not a thing because crime is a phenomenon of proximity. You victimize the people around you. But if you live in an area that's heavily segregated, where black people only live with black people, that's who they're going to victimize. So the numbers are going to be more skewed than if you live in an area that's much more diverse. That's what that means. But if you watch shows, when you watch shows like 48 Hours, and you see episode after episode of white people killing each other, you don't think about white on white crime. Why is that? The only two types of crimes where you'll see a deviation from that pattern that I just mentioned is with serial killers, because they will travel all around to go find their victims because they're looking for a specific type of person, and sexual assault of indigenous girls and women, which are more often perpetrated by non-indigenous males. All those things were bothering me more and more. But ultimately, what made me stop watching the show was the death of a little girl while the show's cameras were rolling. Ayanna Monet Stanley Jones was a 7-year-old African American girl from Detroit's East Side who was shot in the neck and killed by police officer Joseph Wickley during a raid conducted by the Detroit Police Department's Special Response Team. The team was targeting a suspect in the apartment floor above Jones on May 16, 2010. Her death drew national media attention and led U.S. Representative John Conyers to ask U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder for a federal investigation into the incident. Officer Wickley was charged in connection with Jones' killing. In October 2011, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter and reckless endangerment with a gun. Wickley's first trial ended in a mistrial in June 2013. His retrial began in September 2014. On October 3rd, the judge, Cynthia Gray Attaway, dismissed the involuntary manslaughter charge against Wickley, leaving him on trial for only one charge, recklessly discharging a firearm. On October 10th, the second trial ended in another mistrial. On January 28, 2015, the prosecutor dropped the last remaining charge against Wickley, ensuring that there would be no third trial. Allison Howard, a videographer and photographer with A&E who was also present at the raid, was indicted on obstruction of justice and perjury for allegedly lying to prosecutors about copying, showing, or giving video footage that she shot of the raid to third parties, causing a significant delay in the investigation of the case. In June 2013, Howard pleaded no contest to the obstruction of justice charge, and the perjury charge was dismissed. Howard was sentenced to 2 years of probation in July 2013 and fined $2,000. She is the only person who suffered any legal consequences in criminal court for their role in this incident. There have been several civil lawsuits against the city, the police department, and the show and the network. The city actually settled a lawsuit with the family of Ayanna Jones in 2019. And the show stopped filming in Detroit after 2010, but it's still, filming in other cities across America. I found out about Ayanna's death several years after it happened, and as much as I loved the show, I just could not continue to watch it. I just couldn't. That plus everything else that I knew, that I started to learn over the years, I just couldn't. In addition to the death of Ayanna Jones, which is absolutely tragic and completely avoidable, there have been so many lives that have been destroyed by the show in one way or another. In 2014, New Times writer Terrence McCoy found 15 Miami men who had been accused of murder on the first 48 and later walked free because they had been wrongfully accused. Taiwan Smart was one of those men. In 2009, Smart contacted the City of Miami Police Department to say that 2 of his friends had been gunned down. But with A&E cameras rolling, MPD officers became convinced it was Smart who had shot his friends to death in Little Haiti. He was jailed for 19 months. In fact, Smart committed no crime. And now, this is from 2018, after roughly 5 years of legal infighting, the city of Miami is poised to hand Smart a whopping $1.3 million legal settlement for his ordeal. The city commission is slated to approve the gigantic award at its next meeting on December 13. Over the years, several police departments, including Miami, Detroit, New Orleans, have ended their partnership with the show because of tragedies and controversies. We often think of true crime shows as just entertainment, but they shape the way we see the justice system and the people in it. Shows like The First 48, Live PD, Cops, and even scripted shows like Law and Order, they push a narrative called Copaganda. Propaganda. Propaganda. Propaganda is media that is designed to influence public opinion. There is much debate over how to define propaganda, or even whether all propaganda is harmful. One especially harmful and difficult to recognize form of propaganda is Copaganda, or media designed to promote positive images of police and prisons and minimize attention to their violence, racism, and harm. It often justifies aggressive tactics, making them seem necessary for public safety. Since I mentioned Law and Order, let's talk about SVU for a second, since it's a fan favorite. Benton and Stabler used to constantly beat up people. When they arrested them, when they were trying to get them to confess, people were innocent until proven guilty, mind you. But it's okay, because they were the good guys doing it to the bad guys, right? How does propaganda actually affect us? For one, it skews our perception of crime and who gets to be an innocent victim. If you watch any the first 48 shows in any cities that they are still filming in, you'll think that that city is completely unlivable, and you'll see the black population as subhuman. Two, propaganda will teach you to side with the police no matter what, even when they violate the rights of people. Three, it reinforces racial biases by disproportionately showing black and brown people as criminals and dehumanizing them as victims. And four, propaganda makes wrongful convictions seem rare, even though they happen much more often than we think. I loved the first 48. It felt real, raw, compelling. I just loved it. But the more I learned, the less I could ignore the things that I was finding out. And when I found out about Ayana's death, it was just impossible for me to move on and just keep watching as if nothing happened. I just couldn't do it. I'm a hypocrite. I already told you. I made a video about that, and I told you you are too. We do things like that all the time. But there comes a point where it has its limits, and you cannot continue to do that thing and still look at yourself in the mirror and be okay with what you're seeing. And I just couldn't. This show and shows like this one want you to take everything at face value and see everything in black and white. Very simple, evil and good. But life is not like that. Justice is not like that. It's messy, it's complicated, it's nuanced. And there's none of that in those shows. Not in a way that would actually depict how real life works and affects people. And they don't tell the full story. Now that you know why I stopped watching the first 48, I want to hear from you. Do you agree? Do you disagree with me? What do you think? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.